My name is Michelle Rosecrans, and I am on staff with the Miami University Alumni Association. Today, we're really excited to present the webinar, The Best Spirits and Most Hearty Goodwill, Women's Collegiate Baseball in Ohio in the Early 20th Century. Our presenter today is Dr. Callie Batts Maddox, and Callie is nationally recognized for her research on women's baseball. And we've recruited a guest host who also knows a little bit about baseball. He happens to be my husband, Trent Rosecrans. Trent is a senior MLB writer with The Athletic. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Trent, and he'll tell you a little bit more about Callie Batts Maddox, today's presenter.
Hi, I'm Trent Rosecrans. I actually do understand how to use the mute function, but sometimes I struggle with it, apparently. I am a senior MLB writer for The Athletic. I cover the Cincinnati Reds and other Major League Baseball types goings on. And I know a lot about baseball, or I've read a lot about baseball, but we all have blind spots. And this is a particularly interesting blind spot, and one that maybe a lot of people don't know about or think about, or just tangentially assume that either didn't exist or was covered in a movie at one point. Not to get on a certain topic, but but it's it's kind of a little piece of history that a lot of people don't know about. And the fact that we are here, which is kind of known as the birthplace of professional baseball, with the Cincinnati Redlegs being the first professional team. This is at one time the cradle of women's baseball and collegiate baseball in particular. So it's a really fascinating topic, and well, that's why we're here. So as mentioned before, today's presenter is Dr. Callie Batts Maddox. Dr. Maddox is an assistant professor in the Sport Leadership and Management Department. Her teaching and research focus on the, let me restart this. I'm usually better at this than this, but I apologize. Sorry, Callie. Her teaching and research focus on the critical socio-cultural study of sport and physical activity. Her interests include, of course, women's baseball, embodiment, and the globalization of sport. One other thing to note about Dr. Maddox, she is a big part of the women's baseball club at Miami University, middle infielder, or sometimes. So yeah, but questions were collected during registration, and Dr. Maddox will address some of those throughout the webinar today. Please note that we will not have time to get to every question, but you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button. And the webinar will last around an hour. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Maddox.
Great. Thank you so much, Trent, and thanks, Michelle. It's a real honor to be here today and share my research with you all. I do have a snoring dog in the background, so please don't mind her. She's just taken a little noontime snooze. But today I'd really like to share my ongoing research on the history of women's collegiate baseball in Ohio. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Can you all see my screen? Let's do this. Let me try to pull up these slides because I have some amazing photographs to share. We'll do that one. Let me get this up here. Let's try that. Okay, so this is really an ongoing research project of mine, and it's building on this foundational work by scholars such as Dorothy Seymour Mills, Leslie Heafy, Kat Williams, Debbie Shattuck, Jean Ardell, Jennifer Ring, and others who have worked to recognize and celebrate the place of women in baseball history. So inspired by their work, I'm specifically interested in uncovering the stories of women who played collegiate baseball in the Midwest in the early decades of the 20th century. And in doing so, I hope to encourage a contemporary revival of women's collegiate baseball. So this is really a project that is half history and half social activism. Now, I always like to start with a bit of personal background. And I really do try to live by this idea that you learn to use your experience in your intellectual work. This is a quote from American sociologist C. Wright Mills, and I do try to follow this in my professional life. And my personal life was wrapped up in baseball for many, many years. I started playing at the age of 5, and I played Little League until I aged out at about the age of 12. And for many of those years, I was not only the only girl on my team, I was also the only girl in the entire league. So I learned early about sexism in baseball. I learned early about this narrative that the national pastime is not for girls and women. I had a very supportive coach, which helped. But when I aged out of Little League, I reached high school, and I wanted to try out for the boys' high school baseball team. And the coach flat out told me no. And he pointed across the gym, indoor workouts at the time, and he said, "There's the softball team. Go play for the softball team." Now I'm 14, 13, 14 years old. I don't know that I can fight this at that point in my life. So I accept it, and I say, okay, I guess I'll go play softball. I'd never played softball in my life. The ball was gigantic, a totally different game in my mind. But I went and I played, and I ended up playing college softball. And but baseball was always that first passion for me. It was always in my heart. Softball never replaced it. It's very different. So I put that away for a bit. And I kind of came back to it later in my professional life. I worked for Baseball Softball UK doing grassroots development work in London. I had an opportunity to pursue graduate work at the University of Maryland. And during that time, I played in the Eastern Women's Baseball Conference, which is a league composed of 4 teams of women playing hardball, which blew my mind to see women playing baseball together. I ended up in India to do my doctoral dissertation work, and I coached a t-ball team in the New Delhi Little League, which was great fun, and it really rekindled my passion for coaching baseball and being involved in the game. And today I sit on the board of directors for an international nonprofit called Play Global, and we use baseball as a tool for community development, for conflict resolution, and for encouraging really strong action towards gender equality, and really bringing communities together through the game of baseball. So I love baseball. It's part of me. And I have now kind of transitioned into looking at this from my intellectual work and my scholarship here. And so I really wanted to tackle this question of collegiate baseball, because I think there's a gap. And for those of us who are interested in the women's game, these photographs here of the Vassar College Resolutes and then of the ball club at Mount Holyoke College, these are really iconic and important images. These female collegians challenged the assumption that baseball was solely a male preserve. As gender norms continued to shift in the late 19th century and into the early 20th, so too did women's engagement with the game. And the game really started to spread. So we know that the men's game spread from east to west. People really became invested, the rise of professional baseball, but it happened for women too, on a much more recreational level. But we see here this incredible photo from UCLA in 1920. Women were playing at these colleges far out on the West Coast now. And we even see these fantastic images from Wellesley College in the 1920s. So we know that the game was popular across the United States. And there's a lot of work that has been done and still being done on sort of the Eastern experience on the East Coast of these colleges. But I started to wonder, what about colleges and universities and women's experiences with baseball in the Midwest? I think my guiding idea was that there might be some different meanings. We might be able to unpack and understand the intersections of gender and social class and sport and education by looking at these Midwestern colleges and universities that might be different than the experiences on the East and the West Coast. So to explore these questions, I decided to start with my newly adopted home state of Ohio. Now, I'm not originally a Midwesterner. I grew up in New Mexico, so I'm a Southwesterner, a very proud Southwesterner. So I'm still learning about the area. I don't like Skyline yet. I heard it might still happen. But what I know and what I fundamentally understand is that there is a depth and richness to baseball history here in the Midwest. From the beginnings of pro ball in Cincinnati to the heart of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, there's a real sense of rootedness and heritage here, which, as I'll argue a bit later on, positions the Midwest as the perfect place for the revival of women's collegiate baseball. So, in effect, my attempt to uncover this history is a political project. If women were playing college baseball before, why can't we do so now? And not as remarkable exceptions as the lone woman on a men's college baseball team, but as a collective of athletes who love the game and who have a right to play the game at the college level. So I want to use this history to spark a revival movement, to reclaim and recraft women's collegiate baseball as a space of equality and opportunity. The history is here, so we can use it to not only imagine, but actively construct a future where women play baseball in college. But now to the history, because it really is quite remarkable. This was a gem of a find. So I really dove into the archives at these various institutions. And this is quite possibly my favorite find that I found here in the archives at Miami. This is a poem entitled Ye Baseball Maid, written by a student at Western College for Women in 1894. So Western College was founded in 1855. It was an all-women's school until it merged with Miami in 1974. Now, what I love about this is I'm not a poetry expert. So if anybody is, I would appreciate an interpretation, because I'm not entirely sure what it means. But I find it remarkable, and it's beautiful, and it is a incredible insight and a snapshot of what baseball meant to these women at this time in 1894. Women are playing. Women appreciate the game. They are watching, and they understand the physicality and the beauty of it all. So she catcheth balls with wondrous grace. Ye made athlete of muscular resort. So some very strong language that really opens up our thinking about how women were playing this game in 1894. And they were enjoying it just as much as the men did. So an incredible find here. We also know that in the late 1890s, Western was kind of this hub of baseball for women in Oxford. And we know that there were teams as early as 1894 playing at Western, and they had names like the Baseball Nine, the Tall Nine, Brownie, and the Big Nine. Great team names. And this was a newspaper report and really kind of highlighting that baseball created these spirits, these happy spirits and joyful spirits, and this most hearty goodwill ever inspired in these women attending Western. And then we also see here, this is one of my favorite quotes as well too. And this was from a student at Western who is going out and saying, look, you know what? We're getting some jeers. People are teasing us a little bit. We're being taunted because we play baseball, but we don't care. We're going to accept these, and we're going to go forth with zeal unabated. We're going to keep up our enthusiasm because we love the game. We don't care what people are saying. They might be teasing us, but we're going to go play. I just love the spirit behind this, and I think it's something that we can take forward. As a girl, former girl, and a woman who played baseball, I've been taunted. I know those jeers, so I really enjoy this sort of spirit of zeal unabated to go play the game that you love. This was the baseball nine, circa about 1895. And according to school records, baseball really was the most popular sport, so much so that a new baseball diamond was built on the campus of Western in 1895. And there's also evidence that there were these crosstown games between Western and Miami, including this one in 1895. This newspaper recaps sort of the highlights of the game, the enthusiasm, and the fact that their bones remained intact. All right, no bones have been broken so far, but there's a nurse there just in case. There's evidence here too as well that women really continued to play at Western throughout the 1930s. There's various coverage in the school yearbook and the student newspapers. The teams were organized either by class standing or more commonly at Western by dormitory. So starting in the late teens, games were very much strictly intra-college affairs, so no more crosstown games with Miami. It was really just amongst the students at Western. So for example, Peabody Hall would play a game against McKee Hall, or the sophomores would play against the seniors. So there's really this consistent engagement with the game up and through the 1930s that we see here. I love this report, right? 50 girls reported with baseball fever. Now, across town, about a mile down the road, was Oxford College for Women. And this school was founded in 1830, eventually merged with Miami in 1928. And we see here at this school that there's reference to baseball being made in the late 1890s. There was a local historian named Olive Flower, and she noted that students enjoyed two things in pleasant weather: having picnics and playing baseball. So teams were either organized, again, by class standing, or here in a twist of creativity, by the home state of the students. So here we have an account of a game played in 1914 between the students from Kentucky versus those from Illinois. The team from Illinois won the game by a score of 33-23, and later took on the winner of the Indiana versus Ohio game for the college championship. Now, of course, the third college in Oxford was Miami University, founded in 1809, but did not admit women until 1887. And the popularity of baseball at Miami increased steadily throughout the early teens into the late 1920s, to the point that the women's athletic facilities included two separate baseball diamonds, as we can see here, by 1926. Now, baseball for the female students really took off in 1912, which was the first year that Miami fielded an indoor baseball team, which was a very popular game amongst male students as well. Teams, again, largely organized by class standing. And I love here the 1913 edition of the yearbook that the front page for the athletics section features a female ball player. Now, snapshots from annual yearbooks confirm the popularity of baseball on campus. If I could travel back in time, I would love to play catch with Hazel Bay, who was a senior in 1918. Her yearbook profile reads, quote, "In the spring, she confines her entire attention to the all-engrossing sport of baseball. And believe us, she can play that game. Ty Cobb has nothing on her." I adore this profile. And on this other page here from 1923, 5 of the 8 women profiled here played baseball and had baseball listed as one of their chosen activities. So we really see it was a popular sport, and women really engaged with baseball at Miami throughout the 1930s. Gradually gave way to softball, as we'll see, but really up until about the late 1930s, it was a very popular sport on campus. Okay, let's move out of Oxford, and we will journey down to Cincinnati. So the women at the University of Cincinnati saw baseball's popularity rise in the early 1920s as well. By 1924, the Women's Athletic Association was organizing a 3-tiered baseball program featuring tournaments for class teams, so freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors, sorority teams, and then independent non-sorority teams. So at Cincinnati, baseball was an important part of the Athletic Association's endeavor to provide athletics for all and not for a few. This was the guiding philosophy for women's athletics at this time. So this limited intercollegiate competition, but really expanded opportunities for all students to participate. And we see here in the next slide that women were continually engaged at Cincinnati. Lots of newspaper reports, some great profiles in the yearbook here at the University of Cincinnati as well too. Enthusiastic and bitterly fought contests. And through the 30s, again in Cincinnati, they had at least 6 teams, as well as the sorority teams that were playing in tournaments, with team names here like the Vikings and the Persians and the Trojans. So a very active baseball scene at Cincinnati. Ohio University, also very popular. This is a photo from the 1926 yearbook. These are 34 women. They were divided into 4 teams. Perhaps unusually here at Ohio University, the teams were mixed. So they were composed of women from different class levels. And like at Cincinnati, baseball functioned as part of a broader program of physical education that sought to provide, quote, provide every girl in college the opportunity to participate, and in doing so, learn the joy of cooperating with other girls in healthful activities. Now, these are perhaps the weirdest photos I have found in my research so far. These are from the 1914 yearbook at Ohio, in the section that profiles the men's varsity baseball team. Now, sort of casually thrown in with these team photos are Nell, our catcher, and then Nola, quote, our star batter. Now, Nell and Nola do not appear in the 1913 nor the 1915 yearbook, so I'm pretty sure this was meant as a one-off joke, but I find it absolutely fascinating. I would love to dig a bit deeper into Nell and Nola and who included them and what the story was behind these photographs in the yearbook. Quite interesting. Now, Ohio State, of course, baseball, very popular, declared to be the most popular sport amongst female students in the spring. And here in 1924 at Ohio State, the annual spring tournament that was held attracted 27 teams. That's a lot of women participating and playing in these games and engaging with baseball with these tournaments. And so the competition was divided between sorority and independent teams, and then each top team from each division would meet for the overall university championship. So there's active play, right? There's competition, there's engagement at a very high level amongst a lot of students, which really encapsulated that philosophy of providing access and opportunity for everyone. Now, at Ohio State, there's regular mentions of baseball throughout the 1930s and into 1940, but then it vanishes, it kind of disappears. And then nothing is referenced until 1952, and it has now turned into softball. So there's an interesting transition point in the historical record where baseball is being modified, consistently modified, goes away for a bit, and then comes back squarely as softball. Now on to Ohio Wesleyan, which is a relatively small school. It's also Branch Rickey's alma mater. But Ohio Wesleyan had a very robust baseball program. And as reported in the 1923 yearbook here, baseball attracted 120 participants. They were divided by class to compete for their annual championship. And from 1925, I don't know if you all can see here, the yearbook recounts, quote, one of the finest aggregations that ever represented Ohio Wesleyan on the diamond, headed by captain and starting pitcher H. Jewett, this young woman here, who I think is single-handedly challenging acceptable gender norms with her choice of sporting uniform. Like she's like, nope, I'm not going to wear the bloomers. I'm not going to wear the silly little tie. This is much more practical to play baseball. So I love this picture, that she is challenging these norms and these expectations of what these female athletes and female students should be wearing and should be looking like. So rock on, Captain Jewett, doing a great job there. So at Ohio Wesleyan, baseball really flourished well into the 1930s, even as the Great Depression really began to affect enrollment and funding at Ohio Wesleyan. So that was really acutely felt at these smaller schools. So in 1932, here we see that each class had fielded a very strong team, a very strong turnout. And again, also this separate competition for the sororities at Ohio Wesleyan as well. So another smaller school that is very richly embedded with this history was Shepherdson College, which was a women's college that was incorporated as part of Denison University in 1900 and then fully merged with Denison in 1927. Women's baseball appeared in the 1917 yearbook for the first time, with full teams for each class level, plus an independent team. And in an issue of the student newspaper dated May 16th, 1919, the student journalist writes, and I quote, "Really, it is a lamentable fact that the girls' baseball teams do not perform for the benefit of the public at large. For the women of Shepherdson display unusual athletic ability. And the signal cry when the senior shortstop comes up to bat is, 'All aboard for Newark. Outfielder, please start running.'" And as the 1922 yearbook reminds us, baseball is intended as a sport to be enjoyed by both men and women. This is striking. This very simple quote is quite striking when read baseball as male and softball as female. So this little quote has become my rallying cry lately, that baseball is a sport always enjoyed by both men and women. Now, moving on, I think the smallest school that I've looked at so far is Antioch College in Yellow Springs. Certainly, it's a small liberal arts college, not particularly known for its sporting prowess. There's not a deep well of archival material at Antioch, but enough to demonstrate that women were playing baseball into the 1920s and the 30s. There's also, so I found a few references along these lines, which appeared in the handbook for the WAA. There's also a couple of newspaper blurbs in the local area. But what fascinated me the most at Antioch was this blurb from the campus newspaper in 1935. This one here, mentioning that the women will play 2 games with the quote-unquote colored girls. Now, when I was at Antioch researching this, I asked the librarian there, the archivist there, and I said, what does this mean? What is this referring to? And he said, well, it's either referring to some of the local girls. Sometimes there would be informal games played with just kind of the townspeople and the high schoolers around. Or, he said, it could be a reference to the women at nearby Wilberforce University, which was the first private historically Black college in the United States. And it's not far from Yellow Springs. And this really intrigued me. I thought, wouldn't that be fascinating? Wouldn't that open up a whole new avenue of understanding and inquiry about who these women were playing if we had the women from Antioch playing against the women who were attending Wilberforce? So predominantly white, playing with an HBCU. Incredible story, I think, to uncover there. And it would really open up additional questions about race and gender and intercollegiate competition during a time when, this idea about competition and universities and colleges playing each other was not really embraced. It was that sport for all attitude and philosophy. So some interesting questions here. And this brings me to the key points, some important points, some key takeaways. that I have been, wrestling with and focusing on, and which will direct my future research into these questions. So first is the role of the women's athletic associations. They really played an instrumental role in promoting the game amongst female students and carving out opportunities to play. So these WAAs focus not on competition, not on winning, not on that high performance type of attitude, but rather on making sports and physical activity accessible to all women students and celebrating the joys of taking part, celebrating this idea of coming together and playing a game and discovering the joy in that. Second is highlighting the history of women's collegiate baseball in the Midwest. And I really think this reveals an idea that baseball was not just for the upper class women of the East Coast attending these elite private colleges. We know that women played at Smith College. We know they played at Vassar. But now we know they played at Ohio Wesleyan. They played at Ohio State. So I think this opens up some avenues to look at class, to look at participation in more rural areas. And I think it opens up a broader understanding of the game and what the game meant to women that spans social class divisions. So it really was kind of this linking force for collegiate women at this time. And then finally, it's imperative for me to acknowledge that I am telling a predominantly white story. It's clear that baseball was a sport for white women at this time, even though institutions such as Miami, Ohio State, and Cincinnati had been admitting Black female students since the early 1900s. The pandemic really halted my plans to visit Wilberforce University this summer and access their archives to tell that story. But I want to go back and I want to try again because I want to pursue this question of baseball for women at Wilberforce, at other HBCUs. I think it's important. And in doing so, it will expand and enrich our historical record even more. So obviously, there are amazing stories to be told. And there's a lot more that I need to uncover. But a big question is, so what? What's the point? At Miami, we're attempting to use this history to revive women's collegiate baseball. So I helped form a club team in spring of 2017. It's an official club now. We're open to all students, staff, and faculty. And we're working to expand our numbers as well as spread the word in Southwestern Ohio, various regions, to encourage other colleges and universities to start club teams. An important point is that we are more about equality and empowerment than about high performance. So we welcome anybody, regardless of playing experience. We're not the first to do this. There have been other efforts to create women's club teams at the college level, but to my knowledge, we are currently the only women's club team operating in the country. And again, for us, it's a political project. It's about social activism. It's reclaiming women's right to play baseball. And we're hoping to fill that gap, that college gap. We see more and more girls playing high school baseball, really pushing for their right to play. But once they get to college, there's nothing there. So maybe they lose interest. Maybe they give up the game they love. So we're hoping to fill that gap a little bit. And we hope to use the history that's here and stories like those of Hazel Bay to make this a social movement and to add a new chapter to the history of women's collegiate baseball. Thank you so much for joining me. Love to open it up to questions.
That's awesome. What struck me, one of the things that struck me when you're talking about 27 teams in Ohio State, let's just do rough math. Sure. You probably have at least 10 players on a team. You have somebody on the bench. So that's 300. And then you're talking about it, even at a place at Western, where it is each dorm had their own. And these aren't the big high-rise dorms that I had at the University of Georgia or some of these. These are smaller dorms, and just like the percentage of participation had to be really high.
Very high, very high. There's a little blurb I didn't include. I believe it was 1914 at Miami for the indoor baseball season. They did the math, and 67% of female students at Miami were playing indoor baseball that year.
Wow. That's just, and I mean, you don't see anything like that even in intramurals, or at least when I was in school. It was a different time and a different kind of participation about college, but it's just those sheer numbers just kind of that's what popped out at me. So I don't know, it's very cool. And it's just so weird about the timing. And I'm sure you can get into this or other times if others have questions. But you do have the Great Depression and the war that seem to be these huge periods when you just put in the dates as history and what changes things. World wars and depressions seem to be big signifiers in our country as a whole, much less on every aspect. So no, that's super cool and interesting. Okay, before I go on to everybody else's questions, I have some. I'm sorry, this is what I do. I ask questions. Indoor baseball.
Yeah.
What did indoor baseball look like?
Oh, it's a great question. So, there's kind of a complicated parallel history between baseball and softball. And indoor baseball was invented in Chicago in the late 1880s as a way for men to play baseball during the winter. And it eventually sort of morphed into what we would know as softball today. But it was like, what are you good at? You're going to take baseball inside into a gym. So you're going to have these short little base paths. You're going to have a bit of a larger ball, a softer ball. I believe the bat was a little bit longer. But you have kind of the same rules. So it's just kind of this very squished in, condensed version of the game. And it was incredibly popular, absolutely popular. I mean, it spread through the Midwest. It spread to New York, to Philadelphia. It was a very popular game for a while. And then it just kind of died out. And when they took baseball, took it outside, that's when it really kind of became softball and the various iterations of softball that we have now. But both men and women played indoor baseball. So it wasn't a sex segregated kind of thing.
I know just off the top of my head, in Chicago, they play this larger softball like men. It's a very common recreational thing, and it's a larger softball. I don't think there are gloves, and the ball is deadened. So I guess maybe that's there's relations there.
Softball itself has a very interesting history to it and relationship with baseball, and the various iterations of softball and the names that it had before it became what we know as softball. So there's a whole bunch of different variations floating out there.
All right. Well, we have a couple of questions from Dr. Maddox, and you can even, if you heard this and you want to ask some more, we have those open. If you can use the Ask a Question button to submit your questions, hopefully we can get to most of them. But if not, please understand. From Rick Medlinger, love your work you and Jennifer Ring have done on the subject. When might we see a professional women's league, and where do you think the players will come from? College, high school, semi-pro ball, etc.
Right. It's a great question. And Rick, I actually saw your question earlier, and I'm wondering if you're related to Meggie. If you are, Meggie is a member of the U.S. Women's National Baseball Team, which is an entity that a lot of people don't know about. But we have a very strong women's national team, and they're doing amazing things. A great question about a pro league, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. Personally, I would like to see Major League Baseball take a larger role in facilitating this and making it happen. But I'm afraid it's going to require the intervention and the financial backing of some individuals to really get it going. And I think it's going to start small. It's going to start as a small league, perhaps in one region of the country. And we're going to have to attract these young women who have really come up playing baseball. There's some amazing programs like Baseball for All, DC Girls Baseball, that are promoting the game and really providing these pathways for girls and women to play baseball. So I think we're going to have to tap into our pipeline that we have coming up. But we might also look abroad. Japan has an incredible girls and women's baseball system. They have a professional league. Japan has the only professional women's baseball league in the world. And so we need to look to Japan. We need to look to places like Cuba, Venezuela, even France and the Netherlands, Taiwan, South Korea, really starting to build up these programs. So I think it might have to be kind of a global, international perspective that we take to really make it happen in this country.
All right. Dion Fahey asks, in what order were women's varsity sports founded at Miami?
Oh.
When was the first women's sports scholarship granted?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know about the first sports scholarship. That's a great question. I would have to chase that up. In terms of the evolution of women's varsity sports at Miami, it's quite a complicated history, because we have, this mindset in the 20s and the 30s, which was very much everyone can play. It's kind of much more of an intramural kind of model. And then we see this push for intercollegiate competition. And so I believe it was in the 70s that these varsity teams for women were formalized and standardized and were integrated into the overall athletic department at Miami. Basketball, volleyball, swimming and diving, field hockey. And I believe that Miami once had a varsity synchronized swimming team as well, too. So an interesting development of sports. And of course, it's just grown and grown and grown and grown with the support. But there is a very fascinating history of kind of the evolution of women's sports at Miami.
All right. I alluded to women's baseball in movies at the beginning of this presentation. And, well, as Michelle can attest, that sometimes when you have a particular interest in a movie subject, you don't enjoy it like anybody else. I remember when Moneyball came out, poor Michelle and everybody else got an annotated version of the movie on screen, and what was and was not accurate. So it was probably not the most enjoyable for her or other people in that theater, and I do apologize. So Janelle Allen asks, do you feel A League of Their Own portrays valid depictions of women in baseball?
At that time, for what it was, yes. It's a fabulous movie, and it certainly was inspirational for me as a teenager who loved baseball to see that history, and it really informed American society, and they reminded American society that this league existed, that women were playing in this league, that women helped to keep baseball alive during that time, 1943 to 1954. So, I think it was fairly accurate. I know that Penny Marshall did an amazing job with the script and with really ensuring that the depiction of baseball was celebratory, and that the athleticism of these women was really celebrated. So yeah, my short answer would be yes. I have some strong opinions about the film in terms of how we might use it to, lack of a better term, make ourselves feel better about the lack of opportunities for women in baseball now. Because I think sometimes we use it as an excuse. So they, oh, well, we had, A League of Their Own. You've seen that movie, right? Women did play. Yeah, we're still playing. We still want to play. We're largely excluded still. So let's have some new conversations. Let's get some new thinking going on, not to discount the film or the power of the film, but I think it's kind of time to move on and tell some new stories as well, too.
Well, then I got bad news for you. Netflix is doing a series of A League of Their Own. Yeah. So that is going to continue to pop up.
Right, right.
Well, and then this is kind of another question from Nancy Chafin. She asks, what's your favorite baseball movie?
Yeah.
Which is a favorite question of mine. It's
great question. I'm pretty old school in that The Natural is my favorite baseball movie, and has been for a very, very long time. I watch it every spring to sort of kick me into baseball mode.
Not really the best representation of women in that.
No, I know. I have some
problematic things in there.
Yeah, some internal tension with myself with that choice, yes.
Well, that's actually funny. It's how I've written about this and talked about this quite a bit. I have a difference between what I think is my favorite baseball movie, which would be Major League, and what is the best baseball movie. Those are two completely separate questions. And the best would be Sugar. I don't know if you've
that is a great movie. Yes, I have seen that. Yes.
Sugar is about a player being signed out of the Dominican Republic and then playing in the minor leagues. And I have a particular interest in the minor leagues and that process that I've done a lot about. So that is a great movie.
Trent, let me give a shout out to a documentary film called Hardball, The Girls of Summer. Recently released last year, and it follows our U.S. women's national baseball team and sort of their quest to participate in the World Cup and win the World Cup. But it also provides a really important deeper dive into these questions of why our culture tends to exclude women from baseball and why we still have this narrative that softball is meant for girls and baseball is meant for boys. It's an incredible film, and the filmmakers did a great job of asking these hard questions and really capturing the stories of women who fight to play baseball. So that I recommend that, Hardball.
That's a great recommendation. I was trying to look to see if you knew where that was available.
Amazon Prime, I believe.
Okay, very good. I think I see Peacock TV as well. Because there's a new streaming service every week. So we have that. Any other comments? If not, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was... oh, wait, I'm sorry. I had more in here. I missed those. All right. Question from Kyle. Why do you think women's baseball faded and was largely replaced by softball? Was it a gender issue or something more complex than that? Obviously, it's a pretty unusual for a women's sport equivalent to be an entirely different sport versus others like basketball, hockey, volleyball, soccer, etc.
Right. That's an excellent question. And Kyle, thank you for recognizing, this difference in these sporting forms. So often we default softball to say, it's the version of baseball for girls. It's just baseball for girls. Right? It's not. It's an entirely different sport. And men play softball too, right? Men play fast pitch softball too. So we need to recognize that. The answer to your question is wrapped up in changing gender norms that really started in the 40s. So we see World War II and men going off to war. We see women coming into the workplace. And then the reaction to that when the war is over and the rise of this cult of domesticity. And now women's place is in the home. Our men have come back. They have to go back into the workforce. So really wrapped up in these broader forces and these broader narratives in American society that, women are no longer supposed to be in these male preserves of the workforce, of sport. And baseball has now been defined then as a masculine sport because it's a way to present American prowess to the world. It's our game. It's part of national identity, and that national identity is defined as masculine. So it really did switch over starting in the late 30s into the 40s, and then by the 50s and the early 60s is firmly entrenched that softball is for girls and women and baseball is for boys and men.
It's fascinating because you saw with basketball, the rules change to be more uniform as opposed to like when my mother played in high school and they did the three offensive and 3 defensive because girls couldn't run down the floor.
Right. So not feminizing it as well, too, to say, well, women can't handle running 90 feet.
Right.
Women can't throw 60 feet, 6 inches. So let's make it smaller. Let's make the ball bigger. It's easier to hit. So it was all wrapped up in kind of that feminization of physical activity as well, too.
All right. Matt asks, did you find out if any of the Ohio collegiate players from the 30s in your research ended up playing in the AAGPBL in the 1940s?
Oh, that's a really good question, too. No, not that I found. And I think that's going to take some more digging in kind of identifying particular names and particular individuals. But no, I kind of looked at the list of All-American Girls Professional Baseball League players from Ohio and from kind of the general Midwest area, and there was no match that I could find. Doesn't say no, right? I was going to have to do a little bit more digging. That's a great question.
Beth asks, how many women are in the Miami University Baseball Club?
We're struggling at the moment. Really, COVID hit us hard in the spring. We were going to do a big recruitment push. So we've got, 10 that we kind of keep a steady interest in. I really need to do a big recruitment push coming up this year. Hopefully we can get back out on the field in spring if things improve. We're not doing anything right now, obviously, out on the field. But it's tough. It's been kind of tough getting students interested and getting people to sign up. But when they do, I've been so impressed with our students in that they get it, right? They understand that this is about more than baseball. They understand the social justice side of this, and they're really committed to it. So hopefully we're just going to keep, plugging away and keep trying our best, and hopefully we can really get kind of to a critical mass where we can get a lot more people involved.
We have a comment from a different Beth. So interesting. Thanks for sharing your work, and thank you for your passion. Obviously, this transcends more than baseball. It's so important that the work for opportunity continues.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's what it's all about.
And then our final question today is from Allie. How can we support your efforts and get involved, especially for those of us not near Oxford or Ohio? This is very exciting.
Oh, thank you, Ali. That's a wonderful question. I would say, seek out women's baseball in your area and support it. If if there's a youth league or a youth team in your area that's doing good work, support them. If there's an adult recreational league, there's a few scattered around the country. Reach out, support them. We're always looking just for people to help us spread the word as well. People really get on board once they know what we're trying to do. And so for us, a big part of it is just trying to get our message out and our mission out. So I would say, just help us spread the word and tell your friends and tell your family. Be in contact with me if you need some resources. And we really just appreciate people helping us get the word out there.
All right. Thank you, Callie. And now I turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks so much, Trent.
So thank you so much, Callie and Trent, for taking the time to do this webinar today. I really hope all of our viewers enjoyed it as much as I did. If you know someone who you think would really enjoy this presentation and perhaps they weren't participating today, a recording of the webinar will be on our website a little later on today. And so feel free to spread the word about that. I've mentioned before that these, to our viewers, that these webinars are open to not just Miami related people. You can share them with anyone you know. We love to let everybody know about them. And then to our viewers, just take time to check out our other webinars that we have presented. And then those that are coming up, we have some other great ones planned for the month of September, including a rosé wine tasting and one about women freedom singers. So again, thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to do this. This was a lot of fun. We only had one cat cameo in our in Trent's office space. And your dog didn't make any noise.
You did great.
We'll call this a win all around. Well, thanks again to everybody for participating and for submitting those questions. And we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle.